Jambo, in this video I'm going to show you how to create this animated image gallery in React.js with the frame motion animation library. So I'm going to use the property of animation, a frame motion known as Animatesharedlayout, whereby the components sharing the same ID will cross-fade so that each of them will be displayed at a time. One of them will be displayed at a time. So what is happening here is that I have a pop-up model that opens whenever I click on a given image in the grid. So when I click on this image, for example, the pop-up model is also going to display an image which has the same ID with the image I click on. So I have a variable that stores the shared layout ID. So whenever I click on the image, that variable will be set as the ID of the image that I'll click, and therefore that image disappears and takes the new position. So it moves to the new position, which is the pop-up model. Welcome to Edge Concepts. My name is Alugu Godric. See you in the next episode. 7th time I have the app running in my browser. This is a Chrome browser. I'll be using Visual Studio Code Editor. So this is the text that you're seeing displayed here. So I have created two main folders. The first one is a image gallery, which I have created inside the public folder. This one stores the images that I'm using for the project. Then in the SRC folder, I have created components folder, and this is where I have stored my components. But for this particular project, I have created the image gallery folder, and I'm going to create the files that I'm going to store the components for this project. I already have data.js file which contains an array of objects, and this represents the information of the images that I'm going to display in the grid and the pop-up model. So I'll proceed by creating another file that is going to house the grid. So I'll simply create a file here. I'm going to name it image grid. So it's going to be imagegrid.js. Then I have ES6 extension that allows me to create functions quickly, components. So I'm going to create a React functional component and export it by doing that. Then I'm going to import the data. So data is a named variable. And importing this data from data.js. Then I'll also be using a frame motion library. So I have already installed that. If you don't know how to do that, you can open your integrated terminal, then simply type npm install frame motion and you'll be ready to go. So I'm going to import the components from FrameMotion library that I'm going to use for the animation. So the components I'll need are the shared layout animation, not config. It is shared animate layout. The other one is going to be motion. And the other one is going to be animate presence. In fact, this one is supposed to be animate shared layout. So these are the components I'll need from the FrameMotion library. So I'll proceed to creating the grid display by iterating over this array. But before I do that, I'll create a div that is going to house my grid. I'm going to call it image grid. Then inside here, I'm going to iterate over the array using the map method. So it's going to return the information of the single object, which is the image. And I'm going to display that in a div. I'll simply call it image card. Then inside here I need an image. So image tag. I'll be using the template literals. So the images are inside the image gallery folder. And then the name of the image is going to be item.image property. So I need to import this component in my app.js and render it here. So if I save this and head to the browser, I should be able to see the images displayed. Yeah. Then the next thing I'm going to do is to work on the pop-up. So I'll create another class here and call it image pop-up. This one I'm going to render conditionally. So I'm going to create a condition which is going to be a variable. So I need a state manager. So I'll be using the use state hook. So let me import that, then use it down here. So I'm going to create a condition that is going to allow us, display the pop-up. Let me give it a name of a pop-up. Then its initial state is going to be false. So to be able to render our model, let's say if the pop-up is true, then we shall also need to display the model. So I'm going to create another file because this is getting long. So I'll create a functional component that is going to house the pop-up in another file. You simply come here and create a file. Let me call it image popup.js. Create an functional component. So this is what we are going to render here. Let me close this in this zone. Let me also close the app while not need it. So what we are going to use here is going to be the image pop-up. So let's render that conditionally there. Then we need the function that is going to, change the state. So I'm going to create a function here. It's going to be an arrow function. It's going to accept a parameter. I'll tell you later why I'm calling it ID. I forgot to give it a name, so it's called popper. Now, the way the animation works is that the image is going to fade from the grid to the pop-up. So to be able to achieve that, we need to have two components that share the same layout ID. So we are going to have this image sharing a layout ID with another image that we are going to have here, which is going to be the single image on our pop-up model. So to achieve that, we need to wrap this image and the other image in Animatesharedlayout. So what we can do is to come to this part and wrap everything with the Animatesharedlayout. Let me copy that and paste it there. It's not pasting for some reason. Let me just type Animatesharedlayout. Zone. And we're going to copy all these and paste here. Then the model is going to animate, and therefore we need to wrap it in animate process, because the model is going to live the tree and come back to the tree. So it's going to mount and unmount. For its animation to take place before it unmounts, we have to wrap it in animate presence. So I shall come here and wrap our model with animate presence. Then we need the common ID. So first we shall create it here. So I'll simply call it layout ID. So the layout ID on this part is going to be the same as item that ID. Save that. Then we need to move this, to share or to be able to access the layout ID from our component that we have imported. So we need to create a variable that is going to store that. First, we shall use the use state. Let me just call it layout ID. Its initial state is going to be null. So that we shall only update when we click on the image. So we need to be able to update the layout ID and the pop-up variable in this function here. So if this pop-up is false, then we shall set it to true. So before we set it to true, we need to set the layout ID to something. So we shall set the layout ID to this ID. This is a parameter, and this parameter is going to be supplied with an argument when we click on this grid that is housing the image. So we shall set the layout ID. We shall set it to ID. Save that. Then we shall also set the pop-up to the opposite of what we have in the previous state. So if it is true, it's going to be false. If it is false, it's going to be true. So pop-up. Then else. We're going to set the layout ID to null, and before that set the pop-up to false, which is simply going to be the opposite of the previous state. So let's set layout ID to false, not false but null. We'll set it back to null. Let's save that. Then we need to access this layout ID from the important component and also the function. So I shall do props drilling here, where we are importing the component. So layout ID is going to be the same as layout ID. And popper is going to be the same as popper. Save that. Then to be able to trigger the function on click of this, so let's create a click event here. So on click, we're going to have an arrow function. We're going to call the popup function, and the argument is going to be the item.id. So the value that we are going to send to this parameter is going to be item.id of the image that is being clicked. So the ID of the image that will be clicked. To be able to access that, we do the destructuring. So we have popup and we have layout ID. This is capital I. Save that. Then a single object, we shall store it in a variable called single object, or a single image. Let me call it single image. We are going to find an image that has this ID. So find methods. So we are going to iterate over the array, this array of images. So let me copy it. In fact, let me copy all this because I may need it later. So it's going to be data. Find we're going to find the item, where this item dot id is the same as the layout id. Save that. Then here the parent div is going to be housing several divs. So let's give this a class name first. So we are giving this a class name of popup container. I don't know the class name that I used here. Let me revisit. Image popup. Let me call this popup container. Then inside the popup container, we shall have a button that is going to close the popup. Let me call it close button. Inside here, we shall have a paragraph with the letter X. And then we shall also have a single image. Then we shall have the tabs. We call it pop tabs. Inside the tabs, I'll have a single tab. Let me call them tab. Like that. Save that. Then here we are going to display our image, single image. So the image tag, I'm going to display an image. Let me just copy this. I'm going to have a shared layout. but this is the object that we are accessing its image. My keyboard is letting me down. Let me just type it single image like that. Save that. Then the layout ID is going to be the layout ID. This one. The next thing I'm going to do is checking if this is working in the browser. So if I click this image here, you can see it's displayed here, and there is a close X. So let's display the images on the tabs. So for that, I'm going to iterate over the array using the map method, and therefore I'm simply going to copy all this because it's going to be exactly the same. Paste it there. Then I simply need to change this to tab. It's not copying for some reason. Let me copy, then paste here. Then I'll simply change this to tab and remove this. Should be working now. So you can see a repeat of all the images. Now let's work on the styling now. For the styling, I'm going to create a style sheet. Simply going to call it image.css. And I'm going to import it here. Save that. Then I'll start by removing the default padding and margin. Then I'll proceed working on the image grid. Because that is what is housing my cards, I mean the grid. I'll give it a width of 100 view with it. Then I'll give it a display grid. Then padding of 20 pixel. and give it grid template columns. Repeat, I need 3 columns per row, 4 not 3, and 1 FR. Then I'll also need a gap, so grid gap of 20 pixels. The next thing is going to be the image card. My keyboard has a lot of issues. I think some keys stopped working. I really need to work on my keyboard. So the image card is going to have a display block. Then let me work on the image card image. Width it is going to be 100% of the parent. Then border radius of 20 pixels. So if I save this and head to the browser, there I have my grid. So this is the grid and this is the model. So let me style the model, which is housed by this. The model is housed by the pop-up container. So I'm going to give it a display of fixed display of block. The position is going to be fixed. Top 0, then bottom 0, left 0, and right 0. Then let me save this. Let me give it a background color of white. So if I save this, the model is covering everything. Then let me work on, inside the model I have the close button. Before that, let me work on the image. I think let me close this and do that. So this one I'll give it with it a 40 view edit. Then margin is going to be auto so that it's going to be centered. Then its image. We give it a width of 100% of the parent. And then I'll give the image a border radius of 20 pixels. And me save that. See the changes there. And let me work on the tabs. Width is going to be the same as the width of the pop-up image, so it's going to be 40. View width, and display is going to be flex. Justify content, space it evenly. Then the tab. Let me give a tab a width of 40 px and a height of 40 px. And the tab image, I'm going to give it a width of 100% of the parent and a border radius of 10 pixels. I save this and head to the browser. They have the tabs, so to push them here I need to give the tabs a margin of auto. Let me save that. Yeah, so let me work on the close button, this one here. It's above the image card. It's above the pop-up image. So this one is going to have padding of 20 pixels and font size 20, and its weight I'm going to make it bold. So let me save this and see the changes in the browser. There you have it. Let me push this up a little bit by giving this image, pop-up image, a margin top of negative. Let me make it negative 20 pixels. So if I save this, it moves a little bit. Let me make it more 60 maybe. There it is. So we need to be able to close the model when we click this X. So we simply need to access the pop-up function. So on click, so a click event here, we'll call the pop-up function. Control save that. Close it first. Now for the animation to work, we need to do motion dot the objects that are actually animating. Here we have this image here that has a layout ID. So motion.img, save that, and we do the same here because it's this image that shares the ID with the image in the pop-up. So let's save that, then refresh. There you have it. When we close, it goes back. So as you can see, our image gallery is being animated nicely. It leaves its position, it goes back to its position. This is the power of frame of motion in React. So if you like this content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be creating more and more amazing videos on React.js, animations, and JavaScript in general. Thank you so much for your time. See you in the next video.